Welcome to a special colloquium at IST Austria. My name is Tom Hensinger. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker on behalf actually of the sustainability group of IST Austria. It's my great honor and pleasure to have today Professor Verena Winiwarter here is our guest speaker. She's a professor for environmental history at BOKU, the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. Verena holds also an honorary doctorate from Aalborg. She is a member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. She was, in 2013, the Austrian Scientist of the Year. She received the highest science prize of the city of Vienna and also of Carinthia. She wrote in 2015 a book on the history of our environment, which actually won several prizes, including the Austrian Science Book of the Year and the German Environment Book of the Year. Verena specializes on environmental history of soils and waterscapes, and also of industrial and military legacy sites. I guess this is what we'll hear about today. It's actually very interesting to look through her CV. She had FWF grants on Vienna's, the history of Vienna's water, but also on alpine ski tourism. And in particular, what is very impressive is and noticeable is her very interdisciplinary approach to environmental history, both from the social science and the natural science angle. So we are very, very honored and proud to have you here, Verena, today, and look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Professor Hensinger, Tom, for this very kind introduction. And as you rightly pointed out, this question about industrial and Cold War legacies is what I have chosen to talk about today. And I was extremely impressed by the work that East Austria is doing. I had the great fortune to have a campus tour already. I can only express my hope that some of the work that the fine researchers at this institute are doing will in the future be directed also to remediate some of the worst legacy sites that we have produced, by which we are mortgaging our future. Pollution is the world's largest environmental cause of disease and premature death to this very day. We have 9 million premature deaths per year in the year 2015. And if you look at these numbers here, these are by the Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health, one of their infographics. There are a lot of people out there looking at where we have left contaminated sites due to the toxic pollution that humans have produced. This is from Pure Earth's toxic site identification program. Pure Earth is an NGO devoted entirely to managing these mortgage sites, contaminated sites, for the better of humanity. What you will notice in this slide here is that there is a curious absence of toxicity in the United States, Canada, and Europe, and I will come back to explain that to you in a minute. The top 10 most polluted sites worldwide in the year 2013 ranged from the Matasana-Ayacucho River Basin in Argentina to the industrial smelter town of Norilsk in Russia. And Chernobyl is, of course, one of those 10 most polluted sites. Is there no problem in the United States? I wouldn't say so. This is the cancer corridor of Louisiana, with all the different companies and the compounds they are producing along the Mississippi River. I'm just pulling this out a little bit for you to see this better. And you can see in the background in gray, the companies producing that. Pure Earth decided that the pollution in the industrialized world was not their main interest. They wanted to help middle and low income countries dealing with their pollution. And that is not the case in the area where we are talking now, which is the area towards the Gulf of Mexico, the places as known to you probably as Baton Rouge or other big towns in Louisiana. Pure Earth has made a list of the most polluting industries. And as you can see here, their number one polluting industry is ULAB. That is the used lead acid battery recycling. So if we switch to other types of batteries, that also will have a very, very strong effect on sustainability. And ASGM is artisanal small-scale gold mining, which is another one of those very polluting industries. And if you wonder what dailies are, these are lost disability-adjusted life years. So these industries, these 10 industries, of which the last one is the dye industry, are putting collectively over 32 million people at risk, and they account for between 7 and 17 million disability-adjusted life years lost in middle and low-income countries alone. Pure Earth has also come up with an indicator which is based on the pollutant pathway population model, and it ranks the hazard according to something which is called the Blacksmith Index. But this is all only about polluting sites that are active nowadays. Whereas as an environmental historian, it is my mission to contribute to this question by looking at the past. What can environmental history, my field, bring to debates about sustainability? Well, I think that the sustainability debate needs to acknowledge the mortgage that we have already put on the future by producing stuff like plutonium, by the underground labyrinth of abandoned mines and soils drenched with what is called POPs, persistent organic pollutants, such as dioxin in Vietnam, because they produce legacy risks. These are risky and long-lived products that are a defining feature of what is sometimes called the Anthropocene, the age where humans have become a global environmental force. Worldwide degradation of land and ocean ecosystems will not easily heal anytime soon. Regulated rivers and hydropower plants cannot be left alone. They need constant investments into the upkeep of the infrastructure that they are. And that actually means if we do not include the care of legacies into our plans for the future, these plans are likely to fail. And to sum this up in one slide, I would say that since industrialization, so for the past 120, 150 years, humans have put an increasing mortgage on the future of our species, and they continue doing so. And on this continuing thing, Pure Earth Institute is working. And this is, to my plain horror, largely unacknowledged in the sustainability debate. Now, we have successfully dealt with a few things. For a long time, gasoline contained lead, tetraethyl lead. It does no longer. And that is one of the things that gives me hope. But the more we pollute and degrade the habitable parts of this planet, the more dangerous this pollution is, the more long-term security risks we face. And that means the more difficult is sustainable development. We, at the moment, create niches of uninhabitability. And I can show you a sign from from a place in the UK, Near Eastern, in 2014. Keep out unquantifiable hazards. Yeah, but why should we care about Eastern? Well, I think we should care about the limits of the inhabitability of our planet for the human species, which are shown here. The green zone in the middle of this slide is the zone of habitability that's below the safe boundary of the ecosystem thresholds that we face. Each of these boundaries has been calculated by the Stockholm Resilience Institute in a long and interdisciplinary process. There are several boundaries where we cannot yet put numbers on. These are the ones with the question marks. But there is boundaries which are very well measurable. For instance, the freshwater use, you can measure the maximum amount of consumptive water use. You can measure EMSI, that is the extinctions per million species years in biodiversity. We cannot very well measure the biodiversity intactness index yet, but we're working on that. But there is something totally missing in this boundary concept, and these are contaminated soils, soil degradation, and toxic substances, which I would like to call wicked legacies. Now, I've shown you this map where the United States were absolutely blank, and it's again visible on this map. All these little tiny yellow freckles here, where the Earth has measles, so to say, are not in the pollution.org register, which is driven by the Pure Earth Institute. And what they say on their website is contaminated site data is available for only some low and middle income countries. And then in brackets, please also note that we have not listed any contaminated sites in the developed world intentionally. Now I'm going to take you to the developed world in a minute, because the United States of America, that looks so blank and peaceful in this slide here, actually look like that. These are the Superfund sites alone. Superfund is a scheme which is within the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, where the authorities were given the ability to identify particularly dangerous legacy sites and put extra money on them, and that is Superfund. 1,317 Superfund sites alone in the United States. What I'll be going to try to focus on, because I could be talking for hours about these things, is military arrangements. And that is yet another map of the United States where you can see which contaminated sites are within the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board's administration. And you can see that there are active ones, that are the yellow ones, and gray ones. These are the ones that are already closed, but need a lot of long-term attention to make them at least I wouldn't say harmless, but controlled. So this is just what the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board is responsible for. And these are a few of the Hanford, for instance, and Rocky Flats are a few of the most dangerous legacy sites that we have. Usually they come from former nuclear test sites, former nuclear weapons related sites. And I have put this map up here for you so you can see that these are widespread also in the developed world. We're going to go for a very quick tour of Hanford, of one of those Nuclear Defense Board responsibility sites. This is now managed by the Department of Energy. From 1943 to 1945, it was built and it was in use until 1987. It is in the state of Washington, and close to the Columbia River, and it, among other things, contains 172 of these underground tanks, many of them single-shelled tanks that are filled with unknown with an unknown mixture of radioactive and chemical substances. 14 of these tanks have already leaked in the past. They have been repaired in a makeshift way of protecting the environment. But these are, as we speak, still filled with the stuff that was put there during the Cold War. Now, if you want to know how much stuff is in there, let me show you the Cheops pyramid for a moment. And I've tried to calculate the volume of this. So 212,000 liters of toxic, radioactive, hot stuff would fill the uppermost 68 meters of the Cheops pyramid. We're talking about a lot of stuff. And that all is radioactive. Under the Trump administration, what had been going on there was jeopardized by the Nuclear Safety Board under Trump being tried to be dismantled or under threat to be dismantled. So the little protection that we have against corruption and against mismanagement, that you have a board of governors, that under Trump was seriously jeopardized. Now, as I said, this was in use until 1987. And in the Hanford cleanup report of July 2010, their completion date of the waste cleanup of these tanks was by September 2052. I find it very interesting that somebody would dare for a year 52, which is kind of a generation away from now, to tell you exactly in which month it was going to happen. But that is what I would call technological optimism. And then by 2013, they only ever more said it would take 2050 or longer, depending on how much money would be put into this. I'm not anti-United States by no means. I'm usually bashing everybody. This is one of the most polluted sites that we know in the world, of which we know very little. This is the town of Osjorsk, also known by the name Chelyabinsk. That is the sister facility of Hanford. That was the Soviet plutonium factory. And this is again from the pollution registry for Russia. They do actually have data. And if you read through this, you learn that this is the sister site to Hanford. You will also notice, perhaps to your surprise, that the blacksmith index of that site is only 1. Well, that is because there is not very much population currently at risk there. But in 1957, what you can see in red on this graph here was a radioactive cloud that dropped on over 200 kilometers of Russian territory, Soviet territory at that time, because one of the underground tanks at Osjorsk actually exploded, and that is called the Kyshtym belch, which is, I think, pretty euphemistic to call this a belch. It has contaminated the Techa River so that you are still not supposed to take fishes out of that river. People nevertheless do that. This is a map of the radioactive, chemical, and biological hazards in Central Asia. The only thing I want to remind you of that we're not just talking about weapons production sites and repositories of the bomb material, but we're also talking about legacy sites from uranium mining, from the very beginning of the uranium fuel or bomb material cycle. Were we in a room together, there's more than 60 people listening to me at the moment, and I'm very grateful for that. Were we all together in a room, I would ask you now how many immediately, that is in the next 15 minutes, deployable nuclear warheads are in the world today. Now, I can't do that. I have to give you the number. It's 14,000 approximately, down from over 86,000 at the height of the Cold War. These weapons had to be tested somewhere, and this is the Russian test site, Soviet test site in Semipalatinsk, which is now in Kazakhstan. And this is where they dropped their bombs, and the Russian military, you can see here from 1949 onwards. With a combination of espionage and their own good research, they were able to copy nuclear bombs within only a few years. Informed specialist estimates that the region endures double the worldwide cancer rate and that half its people have suffered damage to their reproductive cells, which means that their offspring is more likely to be afflicted by genetic complaints. Doctors have warned that this is going to be transmitted to further generations. Now, to put this into context, other countries also had their test grounds, but note, please, that here the scale is actually broken. Yeah, it's broken, so we can put the millisieverts on one page here, and what you can see here is that Semipalatinsk at 140 millisieverts radiation is way higher than the Bikini Atoll that was the testing ground of the US, or the Mururoa and Fangataufa atolls in the Pacific that were the British and French testing grounds. Now, testing was one thing. The other way to show in the Cold War the other power, that you had the power to deploy nuclear bombs, is to use it for peaceful reasons. This is a very brave human being who actually went and watched all these sites near the Semipalatinsk test site. This is the place where the first multi-stage hydrogen bomb of the Soviet Union was detonated in 1955. It is a question of intergenerational communication, how to tell future generations not to go there and dig there, because the earth there is contaminated by all types of things. And these signs that have been put up there that tell you not to go close, what do you estimate the lifetime of such a sign? We have created legacies that are beyond our own control. And this is the borehole at the Balapan test site, which was supposed to contain a underground nuclear test, because after the above ground tests had been ended by means of an international treaty, the nuclear powers continued to test underground. Now, this bomb didn't go off as it should, and there's a lot of radiation in the ground there. But the other way to show that you were able to have nuclear bombs was peaceful nuclear explosions, and that is Lake Chagan, created by a 140 kiloton peaceful nuclear explosion carried out in the year 1965 near Semipalatinsk. They tried to actually move the river, and they were polluting the environs in a very, very incredible way. So this lake is still as radioactive as you can imagine, and you are not supposed to touch the water there. The toxic legacy is also dangerous when it is plutonium, because you can make nuclear bombs out of it. And what I'm showing you here is the site of one of the most incredible international cooperations that I am aware of. This was a cooperation between the KGB, the CIA, and the Kazakhstan military to take care of an underground weapons production facility on Degelen Mountain, which is now in Kazakhstan. And what they basically did is they took out as much plutonium as they could to put it in safe storage, and they closed this up with a lot of concrete so that terrorists would not be easily able to go there and take out the plutonium. And to commemorate this fantastic feat, they actually put a memorial on the top of the mountain telling the world that it had become safer and not endangered as much by terrorists using these plutonium legacies. What you can see here is the end of a Russian nuclear submarine. You will see a red area here, this is actually an area where nitrous oxides are fuming into the atmosphere. Very soon after this picture, this submarine will sink. It is one of many sunken nuclear submarines in the Atlantic. There are 6 in the Atlantic, I think, and 8 in the Pacific. Thresher was a submarine of the United States, sank during deep diving tests in 1963. And all of these nuclear submarines have 2 nuclear parts on board. One is their nuclear power plant, which is a plutonium power plant, and of course the warheads. Scorpion carried 2 torpedoes with nuclear weapons. And of course, the military tried to figure out if there was plutonium in the sea and it was dispersed. The message here, it had not been dispersed in the first 20 years after this submarine had sunken, but nobody knows what's going to happen in the next 30, 50, 100, or 1,000 years. The half-life of plutonium is 24,000 years. As I said, it's not just interesting to look at the end, at the weapons, it's also interesting to look into the first part. We're going to look at Mailu Suu, which is a town in Uzbekistan. And what you can see here is it's a town in a very steep valley. And this orange stuff here are the uranium mine tailings, themselves very radioactive. And in a disaster-prone area with frequent earthquakes, it's not very good to have such things with earthen dams, because this sludge could easily fall into the river and then pollute a lot of places. Mailu Suu itself has 23,000 inhabitants. So the EU, the European Union, went there and made a big project of remediation there, which means they reinforced the 14 biggest mill tailing areas so that they could protect those mill tailings from further danger. And I'm going to go very quickly into this question: why are uranium mill tailings so dangerous? Well, the fact is that they are. The uranium is not the most important radioactive part of such an ore. 85% of the radioactivity of the ore are in the mill tailings. And on the side here, you see the zoo of radionuclides that are in the mill tailings. And I've just put the polonium-210, which you can see here in activity measures, becquerel per gram. This is fatal in very small amounts. So it's toxic and radioactive. For more than 10,000 years, 75% of the ore's radioactivity will be in the mill tailings. The ore is underground. The mill tailings are above ground. That makes a big difference to their toxicity. And only after several 100,000 years, the activity drops to a low level on which it then rests for several billion years. But that is not so dangerous. The inventory of uranium mill tailings shows you that those places where we've seen that the toxic registry doesn't have much to say are in countries like Canada, like the US, but also in South Africa. Does South Africa produce uranium? Actually, no. They produce gold from an ore that contains 10 times as much uranium than gold. And that means that all the uranium plus the particle zoo that I showed you before remains in the mill tailings in a failed state with little protection for their people. Gold is the one thing I want to talk for a moment now. Let's look at one of the legacy sites that has nothing to do with the Cold War, because I want to make sure that you have some idea. Giant Mine in Canada was operating between 1948 and 1999, taking out 220 tons of gold. with a waste production of over 230,000 tons of arsenic trioxide, which is a very dangerous compound now stored in the abandoned mines' underground chambers. And when the bankruptcy of the mine company happened, which is usual, when a mine company has taken out everything it can, then it goes bankrupt and the public has to deal with the legacy. So where is Giant Mine? It's near Yellowknife in Canada. It's one of the most expensive legacy issues, with a maintenance cost and remediation cost approaching $1 billion Canadian dollars. But it's also a question about communicating with future generations. It's not immediate toxic release that's the problem there. It's rather that the knowledge about these 70,000 tons of arsenic trioxide will be lost. Arsenic is colorless, it's odorless. You can't do much in terms of telling people that when it's in the groundwater, they can't taste it. And a toxic release could go totally unnoticed. And there's a good film about that. It's called Guardians of Eternity, and I would to suggest that you watch this film. Now, I'm not sure if I can actually stop my screen sharing for a moment, because I would like to jump about 10 slides now. I'll simply have to do this quickly here, and you'll have to bear with me, because usually I would simply jump. The Department of Energy cleanup of the nuclear weapons complex in the United States is the largest cleanup this nation has ever initiated. 200 billion or more. And the contamination created by the production of nuclear weapons is long-lived, extremely dangerous, difficult to remove, treat, and dispose. And some of the existing contamination is currently untreatable using existing technology. I would want to go into more details here, but I just want to tell you that plutonium comes with a lot of uranium. It also comes with a lot of other stuff that is releasing toxins that are not radioactive. And the discussion that I know is either you look at the radioactive stuff or you look at the toxic stuff, but very seldom these two things are brought together. But in nuclear weapons, you actually should take these two things together. And I wanted to actually leave you with an image here, with this image here of a plutonium ring of weapons-grade plutonium. It weighs 5.3 kilograms. It's approximately 11 centimeters in diameter. These were sent from Los Alamos to Rocky Flats for producing it. It's enough to produce a small bomb. Metallic plutonium is flammable, especially if it's finely distributed in humid environments. It's pyrophoric, so it will ignite of its own accord, and then it will expand because the plutonium oxide needs more space. So you need to protect this for eternity, even if you have your weapons dismantled. How much plutonium do we have in the world at the moment? Approximately 2,000 tons. And I think that the point that I want to make here is that we need indicators for legacy wickedness. And I've tried to come up with a lot of both social and technical factors to understand what legacy risks are like and how they are mediated by capacities and resilience. This is work that is ongoing. I can't give you a final idea on that. But the challenge is it's an interdisciplinary issue. The information on sites is found very dispersed, and any metric will have to transgress existing metrics and suggestions to integrate social, technical, and ecosystem knowledge. And nowhere in the literature do we have a concept of long-term eternity burden costs. I've tried to picture that. And I've tried to picture Hanford and Giant Mine in something which I have developed, which is the kind of the danger diamond. And Hanford is in red here because there is structural corruption there. It is not as dangerous as other sites in terms of affordability because it's situated in a rich economy. It is very, very technically challenging because it's sludges of unknown composition, leaking tanks. The leaks to ecosystems are underway. And it has a lot of security issues because plutonium and other critical materials for dirty bombs are in Hanford. Whereas in Giant Mine, you have this underground monster, which you need to guard for eternity. And arsenic trioxide is very stable, so you have a longevity issue there. It is, though, in a rich, good country, but it's expensive. And it has to be kept sub-zero eternally. So I hope that with my work and that of a lot of colleagues, we might eventually be able to make sure that some of these legacy monstrosities will be dealt off in the nearer rather than farer future, because without taking care of them, sustainable development will be seriously jeopardized. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Verena. Thank you very much for this very interesting, scary talk. I will be happy to moderate now questions. I suggest you use the chat function of Zoom. So to all the participants out there, if you have a question to Verena, please put it into chat, and I will try to go through it and to give you all a chance to add questions. Let me maybe start. I mean, as fascinating as this was, it was also relatively comfortable it's still relatively comfortable to talk about sites that are far away, and I can't let you go without at least talking a little bit about Austria and the surrounding countries. Is there any pollution sites we need to worry about?
The closest big site is in Saxonia, Thuringia. That's the Wismut. That's the former GDR's uranium mining site, which is a multi-million euro remediation site. It has been taken care of relatively well, but you have uranium mill tailing there that look like the hills around here. Also, in Italy, Enea, the company that is the state-owned company, which is responsible for taking care also of radioactive waste in the 1970s, found out that the cheapest way of dealing with their toxic radioactive waste was to have it being taken care of by the local mafia, which had set up mafia companies. And of course, they would have brought that toxic stuff to sub-Saharan Africa, where you can make hazardous waste dumps very cheaply and without much control. But it's much cheaper actually to sink the ship. So you have hazardous radioactive bottles and corroding tons somewhere in the Mediterranean, and only the mafia knows where, and probably they don't know. There are other sites, but actually in Europe we have been extremely fortunate that the Cold War, we were only a subset of the Cold War. We were not the hotspots of the Cold War, so there's not as much going on there. But also near Gothenburg, there's a radioactive dump so I can tell you that you're not totally safe, but you should also be aware of the fact that the monstrosities around us are smaller, or let me put it like that, less well known.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see now we have some questions. So let me just go in the order that I see here from Anya. I'll just read, she comments, very interesting talk. Thank you. Do you have any idea how these legacies might interact with the effects of climate change, or could you, one could imagine that some sites that seemed safe in the past might not remain so with increased flooding, changes in erosion, etc. Is there any research on this?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Comes up all the time. With the climate crisis, what we get is a larger amplitude of the storms. For instance, you get more torrential rainfall, you get more hurricanes, you get more of that stuff. Any type of infrastructure, like for instance, a toxic waste dump, is potentially at more danger if you have a torrential flood that comes across your floodgates, if you have a hurricane that has already happened at some of the Superfund sites in the United States. Sea level rise will make a big problem for many toxic legacy sites that are at the moment on the coasts, of which there are several. There are also several nuclear power plants which will eventually be challenged by sea level rise, because people tended to put them on the coast for several reasons. So there is an exacerbating effect of climate change on these legacy sites, yes. And there is some research, but as unfortunately, there's in general little research on that.
Okay, thank you. Here is a question from Paul. Novel technology for nuclear energy production is based on molten salts, based on thorium rather than uranium. This seems to be promising. Thorium is abundant and it is supposed to be much less dangerous and polluting. Do you have an opinion from a sustainability point of view on this?
Very good question. Thorium is the go-to material for all people who think that they have found a way to make nuclear power plants work without the danger of bomb making. Thorium cannot be used in nuclear bombs. That is the cool thing about thorium. Otherwise, it is as radioactive and as problematic in infrastructures as are uranium or plutonium-based power plants. I think that it's also, it is abundant, yes, but that's not the question. I mean, we have enough uranium, we have more than enough plutonium. It's not a scarcity question, it's a question of over-polluting the sinks. It's not a source question, but we lack the sinks. Now, one guy once asked me, couldn't we send this into space? And I said, well, do you remember that there was a space shuttle exploding? And what would you do when there wasn't astronauts on board, but toxic waste? So it's a risky question. But thorium, as I said, is marginally safer when it comes to bomb production. I would not go into a novel nuclear technology, though. I would try to get out of nuclear, because nuclear is only feasible as long as you don't have to pay for the eternity costs of it.
From Carmen, how can we deal with all of this in education? We think a lot about how to teach, for example, climate change, not as just a future catastrophe, but looking for a positive framing. But is there any positive framing possible concerning the monstrous dangers that you show?
Very good question. I think I can tell you a few things. One thing that is shown by the monstrous legacies is that dictatorships are not good for the environment. And anybody who says we need an eco-dictatorship is proven wrong by these legacies of dictatorships. I think that if we want to deal with these legacies, we need free, open media, we need democracy. And I think that if you want to talk to people about why democracy is needed, a technical view on democracy might be a new angle to show just how much it is needed. The second thing I would argue is that look at Degelan Mountain, which I showed you, where the KGB, the CIA, the Kazakh military worked together under the guidance actually of Harvard University to actually deal with that stuff. it needs international cooperation. It also means that you can show how well international cooperation functions. It's also a citizen science opportunity. I think that when in the 1950s, people were sent out with Geiger counters to look for possible uranium mining deposits that could be mined. Now, I think you could send out people with a bit of basic training to take soil samples, to watch out for those sites, to create ever better maps and information on where these sites are. So there's a lot of meaningful things that can be done. I don't think that the legacy sites are easily to tame, but it could be a good project to show how it's also not anti-technological. Some of the sustainability discussion is so romantic. Now, each of these legacy sites needs as much up-to-date, cutting-edge technology as we can master. That might also be a positive framing. And if I told my own daughter when she studied chemistry, if you want to have a job where they bring you with a Rolls Royce and they roll up a red carpet for you, learn how to dismantle nuclear legacy sites. She went into something else, but there are job opportunities out there as well.
It's a very concrete question from Stefan, specifically for civil nuclear energy. Is there actually some sort of concrete estimation of the extra cost on electricity, for example, that's caused by taking care of legacies?
Well, I don't give you numbers because the numbers are different from calculation to calculation. But everybody who has ever done that calculation can show you that nuclear energy, as soon as you figure in the eternity costs, is by a factor between 5 and 10 more expensive than any other form of energy. It's not viable.
That's a very concrete answer. Is there a map showing the places in the world's oceans where problematic substances are stored, and not only intentionally, but for example also through accidents? Transport ships with toxic material may have sunk. What dangers do they pose?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's a book called Poisoning the Well by a guy called I think Christopher Hamblin, and he put together maps of all the sites where the militaries, the US military is better known for what they did, which doesn't mean that they were worse than their Soviet counterparts, but he has a toxic waste map of all the dump sites where the military disposed of radioactive stuff in canisters and stuff that is prone to corrosion. So there's not a map to which I can direct you, but there are sources that have put this together. And in the 1950s, these were barges filled with these now corroding canisters that were simply disposed off the coast because the seas are so big. It will, by means of dilution, take care of it all. For a while, there was also a worry about the gas grenades from World War II that were put into the Baltic. And for some time, fishermen in the Baltic actually pulled up one of those phosgene grenades every few years, and a few fishers were heavily damaged and died. That is no longer a problem because they all are now totally corroded and have left their gas leaking. As to a complete register of everything, which would include the long-term legacies of exploded oil platforms, tankers, and stuff like that, I know of no such source. But if you want to put together a grant to make such a map, I would be happy to help.
Okay,
there's not very much attention to this problem. So, yeah, great question.
Thank you. So I feel we slowly should come to an end, but let me take one more, which actually more common. And the question gets back to the nuclear energy So the comment here says, you focus a lot on nuclear waste. For energy production, nuclear power is arguably a good possibility to get away from fossil fuels. And CO2 has a lifetime of tens of thousands of years and cannot be controlled. Even worse than nuclear waste. Do you want to comment back on this?
Well, I focused on Cold War. I didn't talk about civil nuclear energy for a reason, because I think that we should take care of Cold War legacies, and there no such calculations can be put to use anyway. I would like to suggest that you would do a full life cycle analysis of a nuclear power plant. Such full life cycle analyses showing also all the building costs and the costs to the environment over time usually show that while some people think we need a quick fix against CO2, and nuclear is purportedly CO2 free, this is not the case. If you do a full life cycle analysis, you can see that there is a CO2 burden also on nuclear fuel. Without fossil fuels, nuclear would not exist. I tend to call this the fossil nuclear age, and it is usually a question. What you put here so very correctly is perspective. It's a question of where you draw the system boundaries. And if you draw the system boundaries in a particular way, you can produce calculations that show you that nuclear is a good idea. But I know of only one in the world final storage repository for nuclear waste. That is in Onkalo in Finland, and it's now about to be filled. All the other nuclear waste from civil nuclear plants is at the moment in mid-term storage. And as long as there are not enough long-term storage facilities to deal with that waste, I will not be convinced about the feasibility of nuclear power plants.
Okay, this was also a very clear answer. Thank you, Verena. I think we'll leave it here. I want to thank you again for your very fascinating talk on raising here a subject. I think that's much too little reported on. Thank you. And I thank everybody in the audience for being here and for all the good questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me and for the invitation. Thank you.